"You can laugh at a man's divorce papers," the old clerk whispered as he stamped another document. "But you should never laugh before you know what he chose to lose." The laughter started quietly, almost politely, the kind that hid behind expensive smiles and polished manners. But in the echoing marble lobby of the Jefferson County Courthouse in Denver, it carried farther than anyone expected. Ethan Brooks stood alone near the family court filing desk, wearing faded work boots, worn blue jeans, and a charcoal work shirt with Brooks Auto Repair stitched above the pocket. His hands still carried faint traces of engine grease despite the careful scrubbing he had given them before walking into the courthouse. Across the lobby, Victoria Sinclair stepped through the revolving doors surrounded by attorneys, financial advisors, and executives who adjusted their pace to match hers. At 36, the CEO of Sinclair Automotive had built a reputation for seeing weakness before anyone else did. Multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, aggressive negotiations, and impossible turnarounds had earned her respect on Wall Street and fear in nearly every boardroom she entered. She had arrived to finalize paperwork involving a regional manufacturing acquisition occupying the upper floors of the courthouse. Family court was merely an inconvenience she happened to pass through. As she crossed the lobby, her eyes briefly landed on Ethan's open folder resting against the counter. One page slid forward just enough for a single phrase to become visible. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Victoria slowed almost without realizing it. She studied the quiet mechanic signing his name with calm, steady strokes. No expensive watch, no tailored suit, no attorney standing beside him. Just a man ending a marriage by himself. One of her executives noticed her expression and leaned closer. "Looks like life didn't work out for him." Victoria allowed herself the smallest smile. Maybe next time he'll realize love doesn't pay the bills. A few people nearby chuckled softly before returning to their conversations. Ethan heard every word. He lifted the pen, closed the folder, thanked the elderly clerk with genuine kindness, and simply nodded before walking toward the courthouse exit. He never looked at Victoria. He never defended himself. He never offered an explanation. The automatic doors opened, letting in a cool Colorado breeze carrying the scent of rain and fresh pavement. Sunlight reflected across the polished floor while distant traffic hummed beyond the courthouse steps. Victoria watched him disappear toward an aging Ford pickup parked along the curb. Something about the way he carried himself unsettled her. There was no bitterness, no embarrassment, no desperation, only quiet dignity, as though the worst day of his life still couldn't convince him to surrender his peace. "Interesting," she murmured before turning toward the elevators. She had already forgotten his face, or so she believed. By the end of the week, that same mechanic would quietly step into her world, and the fortune she thought defined success would become the smallest secret he had ever kept. Edit the next morning arrived with the familiar rhythm Ethan Brooks trusted more than luck. Before sunrise, the lights inside Brooks Auto Repair glowed warmly against the cool Denver air, while the smell of fresh coffee mixed with motor oil and clean steel. Every wrench hung exactly where it belonged. Every workbench had been wiped down before he unlocked the front door. His customers often joked that his garage looked more like a craftsman's workshop than a repair shop, but Ethan believed people deserved to know someone respected their car as much as they did. He set a faded lunchbox on the corner of his desk before hearing quick footsteps race across the concrete floor. "Dad, you forgot your sandwich again." 12-year-old Lily Brooks laughed as she hurried inside, carrying a paper bag almost as large as her backpack. Ethan smiled, accepting it with both hands as though she had handed him something priceless. "I guess I would be pretty hungry by noon," he said. Lily rolled her eyes with playful affection. "You always tell me to remember breakfast, but you almost forget yours every day." He shrugged with quiet embarrassment. "That is why I have the smartest partner in town." She grinned proudly before heading toward school, waving from the sidewalk until she disappeared around the corner. The garage grew quiet again except for the gentle ticking of cooling engines and the distant sound of traffic beyond the open bay doors. Customers came one after another. A retired schoolteacher needed new brakes, but admitted she could only afford part of the repair this month. Ethan quietly reduced the invoice without mentioning it. A delivery driver worried about an aging transmission because missing work would mean missing rent. Ethan found a simpler repair that saved him hundreds of dollars. No speeches, no announcements, Just. Victoria remained near the service counter while Ethan lowered the hood with a quiet click and wiped his hands on a clean shop towel. He looked at the sedan one more time before turning toward her with the same calm expression he had worn since she arrived. The fuel pressure sensor is beginning to fail, he said. It is not a major repair yet, but if you ignore it for another few weeks, it could leave you stranded at the worst possible time. Victoria glanced at her watch. How much? Ethan walked over to the computer, entered the estimate, and printed the invoice. She looked down expecting a number large enough to match the luxury badge on her car. Instead, the total was surprisingly modest. She raised an eyebrow. You could have charged me twice this, and I would not have noticed. Ethan smiled politely. That would not make it the right price. She studied him for a moment before reaching into her purse and placing several $100 bills on the counter. Keep the change. Ethan counted only the amount listed on the invoice, folded the remaining bills neatly, and placed them back in front of her. You accidentally gave me too much. Victoria frowned. It was not an accident. Then I still cannot accept it. Why not? She asked. Consider it appreciation. Ethan gently shook his head. Appreciation should never become confusion. You paid for a repair. Nothing more. For the first time that day, Victoria found herself without an immediate reply. Most people either feared disappointing her or eagerly accepted every generous gesture she made. This mechanic had quietly refused several $100s without the slightest hesitation. She slipped the money back into her purse, hiding her surprise behind a composed expression. As she prepared to leave, Lily's cheerful voice drifted through the open garage door. Dad, I finished my science project. She hurried inside carrying a carefully built model bridge made from wooden craft sticks. Ethan's face brightened instantly. Let me see. Lily placed it on the workbench while he examined every detail with genuine admiration. This is excellent engineering, he said. Did you test how much weight it can hold? She nodded excitedly. Almost 40 pounds. Ethan laughed softly. Then I think you built something stronger than most real bridges. Victoria watched from several feet away. There was no expensive office, no luxury home, no public recognition. Yet father and daughter spoke with a warmth that money could not manufacture. Lily noticed the visitor and smiled politely. Nice car. Victoria smiled back almost automatically. Thank you. Lily looked at Ethan. Is she one of your customers? Yes, he answered simply. And now her car is ready to go. Victoria expected him to mention her company, her title, or the importance of her business. He did none of those things. To Ethan, she was simply another customer whose vehicle needed attention. As she drove away, the repaired engine purred with effortless precision, but her thoughts remained inside the little garage. She could not explain why a man with worn work boots, a modest repair shop, and freshly signed divorce papers carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing left to prove. Somewhere beneath that ordinary life, she sensed a story no financial report could ever reveal, and for reasons she did not yet understand, she suddenly wanted to know what it was. The following Tuesday, a steady spring rain settled over downtown Denver, leaving the streets washed clean beneath silver clouds. Inside the glass headquarters of Sinclair Automotive, floor-to-ceiling windows reflected rows of conference tables, polished marble, and carefully planned. Success. Victoria Sinclair sat at the head of the executive boardroom reviewing acquisition reports while department leaders discussed profit margins, supplier contracts, and expansion opportunities. Usually nothing escaped her attention, yet her thoughts drifted back to the quiet mechanic who had returned hundreds of dollars without a second thought. Finally, she closed the report in front of her. I have a question, she said calmly. The room fell silent. Does anyone know Brooks Auto Repair? One vice president answered first. Small independent shop. Family owned. Good reputation. Nothing remarkable. Another executive added. They have never accepted our partnership offers. They always stay independent. Victoria looked up. Never. Not once. She tapped her pen thoughtfully. Strange. Most repair shops competed for corporate contracts because they guaranteed stable income, discounted parts, and long-term security. Turning them down repeatedly made little business sense. Pull their public records, she instructed. Within minutes, financial summaries appeared on the large screen. The numbers only deepened the mystery. The property had been fully paid for years earlier. No commercial loans. No outstanding equipment leases. No investment partners. No outstanding tax liens. No recent refinancing. The garage operated with remarkable stability despite charging noticeably lower prices than comparable shops throughout the county. Victoria leaned forward. How is that possible? The chief financial officer adjusted his glasses. Based on these records, they should have expanded years ago or sold the business. Instead, they remain exactly the same size. Perhaps he lacks ambition, one executive suggested with a shrug. Victoria slowly shook her head. No, men without ambition do not maintain this level of discipline. She remembered the spotless workshop, every tool carefully arranged, every customer treated with equal respect, every dollar honestly accounted for. Nothing about Ethan Brooks suggested carelessness. Quite the opposite. He appeared to be living according to a decision no one else understood. That afternoon, Victoria canceled an invitation to an exclusive investor luncheon and instead drove past Brooks Auto Repair without stopping. The garage doors were open despite the rain. Ethan worked beneath the hood of an aging pickup while an elderly customer stood nearby, holding an umbrella. They laughed together about something she could not hear. A few minutes later, the customer reached for his wallet. Ethan quietly pushed half the money back into the man's hand before closing the hood. The older gentleman looked grateful enough to embrace him, but Ethan simply smiled, wished him a safe drive home, and returned to cleaning his tools as though generosity required no recognition. Victoria remained parked across the street longer than she intended. She had spent years believing success could be measured by quarterly earnings, market share, and corporate influence. Yet the man she had dismissed inside the courthouse seemed to measure wealth by entirely different standards. As raindrops slid slowly across her windshield, one question refused to leave her mind. If Ethan Brooks was not chasing money, then what exactly had he already found that everyone else was still searching for? By the end of the week, curiosity had quietly replaced judgment. Victoria Sinclair had built her career on one simple principle. Every mystery eventually surrendered to enough information. Every hidden pattern revealed itself under careful analysis. Every person left a trail. Sitting alone in her office long after sunset, she opened a secure research portal normally reserved for evaluating acquisition targets. She typed a single name into the search field. Ethan Brooks. The results appeared almost instantly, yet they told her remarkably little. A state business license. Property ownership records for the repair shop. A modest home purchased more than a decade earlier. Tax filings that matched the income of an independent mechanic. Nothing extravagant. Nothing suspicious. Nothing explained the quiet confidence she had witnessed with her own eyes. She searched again using broader databases. Professional certifications. Community involvement. Legal records. Apart from the finalized divorce, his life was almost completely free of conflict. No lawsuits. No bankruptcies, no unpaid debts, no lavish purchases, no interviews, no photographs from charity galas, no social media presence filled with carefully edited success. It was as though Ethan Brooks had intentionally stepped away from a world obsessed with being noticed. Victoria leaned back in her chair, listening to the soft hum of the city beyond the glass walls of her office. That is impossible, she whispered. In her experience, people always wanted something. Recognition. Influence, wealth, attention. Yet this man seemed determined to leave no unnecessary footprint behind. The following afternoon, she invited Martin Hale, the company's longtime director of corporate intelligence, into her office. Martin had spent 20 years verifying executives, investors, and business partners. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was him. Victoria handed him a thin folder. I want a complete background report. Martin glanced at the cover. A mechanic? Yes. He smiled politely. Should not take very long. That is what I thought, Victoria replied. 3 days later, Martin returned carrying the same folder, only slightly thicker than before. His expression was unusually thoughtful. I have never seen anything quite like this. Victoria looked up immediately. What did you find? Nothing that explains him. She frowned. Martin opened the report page by page. Every record is legitimate. Every tax payment is on time. Every permit is current. Former customers speak highly of him. Former employees describe him as honest. His neighbors say he fixes bicycles for children during the summer and snowblowers for older residents during the winter without charging labor whenever someone is struggling financially. Victoria remained silent. Martin continued. There is no hidden debt, no hidden investments, No criminal history. No questionable business relationships. It is almost peaceful. That final word lingered in the room. Peaceful. It sounded strangely valuable. Victoria looked through the photographs included in the report. Ethan locking his garage at sunset. Ethan cheering from the sidelines during one of Lily's school soccer games. Ethan carrying groceries while his daughter laughed beside him. Every image showed the same quiet smile she remembered from the courthouse. People usually become complicated when you look closer, she said softly. He becomes simpler. Martin nodded. And somehow that makes him even harder to understand. After he left, Victoria stood beside the window watching the lights of Denver shimmer against the evening sky. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Ethan Brooks was probably closing his garage, preparing dinner with his daughter, and ending another ordinary day without realizing that one of the most powerful women in the state had become completely unable to explain the extraordinary simplicity of his life. 4 days later, Martin Hale knocked softly before entering Victoria Sinclair's office carrying a sealed envelope instead of his usual digital tablet. His expression had changed. The confidence of an experienced investigator had been replaced by quiet disbelief. Victoria looked up from a stack of acquisition reports. You found something. Martin carefully closed the office door behind him. Not through public records. He placed the envelope on her desk, but did not immediately let go of it. I had to contact an old legal colleague who specializes in estate administration. Everything I am about to tell you is completely lawful to verify, but almost impossible to discover unless you know exactly where to look. Victoria slowly set her pen aside. Go on. Martin finally released the envelope. Inside rested several certified documents bearing the seal of a respected Denver law firm. Across the top of the first page appeared a familiar family name that instantly caught Victoria's attention. Brooks Industrial Holdings. She stared at it for several silent seconds before looking back at Martin. The manufacturing company? He nodded. The same one that quietly supplied precision components to aerospace, energy, and automotive companies for nearly 50 years before restructuring into a private investment group. Victoria's heartbeat slowed as she continued reading. The valuation estimates attached to the documents reached well into the billions of dollars. This cannot be. Connected to Ethan, she said almost automatically. Martin took a slow breath. It is. The room became completely still. Rain tapped gently against the windows while distant traffic drifted through the evening air far below the executive floor. Victoria searched every page again, hoping to find a misunderstanding hidden somewhere in the legal language. There was none. Ethan Brooks had been named the sole beneficiary of the Brooks Family Trust after the passing of his father several years earlier. The trust included controlling ownership of Brooks Industrial Holdings along with an investment portfolio that generated more annual income than many public companies. She looked up in disbelief. Then why is he repairing cars in a neighborhood garage? Martin quietly slid forward the final page. Because he has never claimed control of the trust. Victoria blinked. What do you mean? The assets remain professionally managed under temporary trustees because he declined to assume active ownership. She read the sentence twice before it finally settled in her mind. Declined. Not delayed. Not disputed. Declined. No lawsuits, she asked. None. No financial crisis? None. No family conflict? Martin shook his head. Everything appears completely voluntary. Victoria slowly stood and walked toward the wide window overlooking downtown Denver. Countless office lights stretched across the city beneath the fading sunset. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Ethan Brooks was probably closing the doors of his modest garage exactly as he did every evening, while an untouched fortune quietly waited behind layers of legal protection. She remembered every assumption she had made inside the courthouse, every silent judgment she had formed from a pair of worn work boots and a divorce filing. None of them had been true. Yet the greatest surprise was not the money. It was the realization that a man capable of possessing almost unlimited wealth had willingly chosen an ordinary life instead. For the first time in many years, Victoria Sinclair found herself confronting a question no balance sheet, no market analysis, and no corporate strategy had ever prepared her to answer. Why would someone who could own almost everything choose to live as though quiet purpose was worth infinitely more than fortune itself? That night, sleep refused to come easily for Victoria Sinclair. The legal documents remained neatly arranged across her dining table, but one page had captured her attention more than all the others. It was a letter written by the attorney responsible for administering the Brooks family trust. The letter explained that Ethan Brooks had never challenged the inheritance, never rejected his family's legacy, and never attempted to sell it. Instead, he had voluntarily postponed assuming control, requesting that professional trustees continue operating the company until he believed the time was right. There was one additional note attached in the attorney's handwriting. The reason for the delay was contained inside a sealed personal statement left by Ethan's late father. The following morning, after obtaining permission through completely proper legal channels, Victoria was allowed to read a copy of that statement inside the attorney's office. The room was quiet except for the gentle ticking of an antique wall clock and the distant sound of traffic drifting through an open window. She unfolded the carefully preserved document and began reading. Ethan's father had written that wealth could build buildings, purchase companies, and influence markets, but it could never build character. He wanted his only son to inherit more than a business. He wanted him to inherit wisdom earned through ordinary work, honest relationships, and daily responsibility. The letter explained that the trust would always belong to Ethan, but true ownership required something money could never purchase. The ability to remain the same man, whether standing inside a factory worth billions of dollars or beneath the hood of an old pickup truck. Victoria slowly lowered the page as the meaning settled over her. Suddenly, every unanswered question found its place. Ethan had not chosen a smaller life because he lacked opportunity. He had chosen it because he believed success measured by character would outlast success measured by fortune. Later that afternoon, across town, Ethan finished replacing the brakes on a family minivan before washing his hands at the utility sink. Lily entered the garage carrying a stack of school papers with an excited smile. "I got an A on my history project," she announced proudly. Ethan looked through each page with genuine interest, praising not only the grade but the effort behind it. "I am proud of the work you did," he said warmly. "The grade is simply the result." Lily smiled and slipped her hand into his as they locked the garage for the evening. They walked home beneath the golden light of the setting sun, talking about homework, dinner, and the community picnic scheduled for the weekend. Nothing about their conversation suggested hidden wealth. Nothing hinted at boardrooms, investment portfolios, or family trusts. To anyone passing by, they looked like an ordinary father and daughter enjoying an ordinary evening together. Yet Victoria now understood that what appeared ordinary had been carefully chosen. Every repaired engine, every honest invoice, every quiet act of kindness represented a decision made long before she had ever stepped into that courthouse. As she watched them from the opposite side of the street without interrupting their walk, one realization settled deeply into her heart. Ethan Brooks had inherited an extraordinary fortune years ago, but the greatest inheritance his father had ever given him was the freedom to prove that dignity did not come from what a person owned. It came from the values they refused to sell, no matter how much the world believed they were worth. The following Saturday morning arrived beneath a bright Colorado sky, and Brooks Auto Repair was busier than usual. Families prepared for weekend road trips, delivery drivers needed quick inspections, and neighbors stopped by simply to say hello. Ethan Brooks moved through the garage with the same quiet patience he showed every customer, never rushing, never cutting corners, never allowing the growing line of vehicles to change the way he treated people. Just before noon, a familiar black luxury sedan turned into the parking lot and came to a smooth stop beside the service bay. Victoria Sinclair stepped out alone. This time, there were no attorneys, no executives, and no assistants walking behind her. She stood for a moment, watching Ethan finish explaining a repair to an elderly couple before they thanked him warmly and drove away smiling. Only then did she walk toward him. Ethan looked up and offered the same polite smile he had offered on every previous visit. "Good afternoon. Is everything running well?" Victoria nodded slowly. "The car has been perfect." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The soft breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from a nearby park, while wind chimes hanging outside a neighboring shop produced a gentle melody. Finally, Victoria took a quiet breath. "I owe you an apology." Ethan waited without interrupting. "The day we met at the courthouse," she continued, "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I believed your clothes, your job, and your divorce explained who you were. I was wrong. Ethan looked at her with calm eyes that carried no resentment. We all make quick decisions sometimes. Victoria shook her head. Mine was not quick. It was proud. She hesitated before continuing. I know about the Brooks family trust. Ethan remained completely still. No surprise crossed his face. No concern. No excitement. Only the same quiet peace she had come to recognize. Then you know more about my family than most people do, he replied gently. I also know you could be living a completely different life. Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was helping organize supplies inside the office. A small smile appeared across his face. I already am living the life I chose. Victoria followed his gaze. Most people would have taken control of everything. Perhaps, Ethan answered. But my father spent his entire life teaching me that money is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. I wanted Lily to know me as her father before she ever knew me as someone wealthy. I wanted her to see me earn respect with my hands before she ever learned our family name could open doors. Victoria lowered her eyes, remembering every boardroom where she had measured people by titles and appearances. I spent years believing success meant having more than everyone else, she admitted softly. Ethan smiled with genuine kindness. Success is waking up able to recognize yourself in the mirror. Everything else is simply a bonus. The words settled quietly between them as sunlight poured through the open garage doors, illuminating floating dust particles that shimmered like tiny stars. For the first time in many years, Victoria Sinclair realized the poorest moment of her life had not been before she became wealthy. It had been the moment she believed another person's value could be measured before taking the time to understand their character. Summer arrived quietly in Denver, and life at Brooks Auto Repair continued almost exactly as it always had. The same garage doors opened before sunrise. The same coffee brewed every morning. The same neighbors stopped by to exchange greetings before work. If anyone expected Ethan Brooks to announce his family fortune or transform his modest business into something grander, they were disappointed. Nothing changed because nothing needed to. The greatest victories in his life had never depended on headlines. They had always begun with ordinary choices repeated every single day. Across town, however, something had changed inside Victoria Sinclair. During executive meetings, she found herself listening longer before speaking. She asked new employees about their families instead of only their qualifications. She visited manufacturing plants without announcing her arrival and spent time talking with technicians, mechanics, and warehouse workers whose names had once escaped her attention. Her executives noticed the difference almost immediately. The company had not become weaker through kindness. If anything, respect flowed more naturally throughout every level of the organization. One Saturday afternoon, Victoria drove back to Brooks Auto Repair carrying nothing more than a homemade apple pie from a neighborhood bakery. Lily answered the office door with a bright smile. Dad is finishing one last repair. Victoria laughed softly. I figured he might be. She waited beside the old wooden workbench while sunlight streamed through the open garage doors. Ethan finished tightening the final bolt beneath the hood of a classic Mustang before lowering it gently into place. The grateful owner shook his hand and drove away with a smile that said more than words ever could. Ethan walked over, wiping his hands on a clean towel. Everything all right? Victoria held up the pie with an embarrassed smile. I thought I would say thank you properly this time. Ethan accepted it with quiet gratitude. Lily will be very happy about this. Lily laughed from inside the office. I already am. The three of them sat together on a simple wooden bench outside the garage while sharing slices of pie beneath the warm afternoon sun. There were no conversations about billion-dollar companies. No discussions about investment portfolios or inheritance documents. They spoke about Lily's upcoming science fair, the changing weather, a family of bluebirds nesting near the garage roof, and an elderly customer whose restored truck had finally passed inspection after months of careful work. Victoria realized she had never attended a meeting that felt more valuable than this quiet afternoon. Before leaving, she looked toward Ethan with sincere gratitude. You changed the way I see success. Ethan smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the calm confidence she had admired from the very beginning. No, he answered. You simply chose to look a little deeper. As the sun slowly settled behind the Rocky Mountains, long golden lights stretched across the parking lot, and for a brief moment the world seemed wonderfully still. The courthouse laughter had disappeared long ago. The assumptions had faded. The hidden fortune had never become the true miracle. The real miracle was that one person's quiet dignity had reminded another that every human being deserves respect before judgment, kindness before conclusion, and understanding before opinion. Because in the end, the richest life is rarely measured by what rests inside a bank account. It is measured by the peace that remains when there is nothing left to prove.